Welcome to part 3. Subscribe and like for more. Arinza knew that the elders would never allow Neoma to stay in the palace, especially since she was a servant and not a wife. He summoned for the chief priest. The chief priest arrived promptly, his wise eyes taking in the tense atmosphere. "Your Majesty, what seems to be the problem?" he asked, his voice calm and soothing. Arinza explained the situation, leaving out no details. The chief priest listened attentively, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "I see," he said finally. "This is indeed a delicate situation. But I think I can help. Let me speak to the elders and see what can be done." Arinza nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, chief priest. I knew I could count on you." The chief priest smiled and nodded. "I'll do my best, Your Majesty. But I must warn you, the elders will not be easy to persuade. They are set in their ways and may not take kindly to this news." Arinza nodded, determination etched on his face. "I understand. But I am willing to do whatever it takes to protect Neoma and our child. I will not abandon them." The chief priest met with the elders and explained the situation, but they were unmoved. "The king's actions are unacceptable," said one of the elders. "He cannot father a child with a servant and expect us to accept it." The chief priest tried to reason with them, but they refused to budge. "The only way we will accept this child is if the king marries Neoma," said another elder. "That way, the child will not be a bastard and will have a legitimate place in the palace." The chief priest knew that this was a tall order, but he also knew that it was the only way to appease the elders. He returned to the palace and met with Arinza, explaining the elders' demands. Arinza was taken aback. Marry Neoma? It was unheard of for a king to marry a servant, but he knew that he had no other choice. He thought of Neoma and the child she carried, and he knew that he had to do what was right. "Very well," he said finally. "I will marry Neoma." The chief priest nodded and left to speak with Neoma about her marriage to the king. The marriage between Arinza and Neoma was a quiet and intimate affair, with only the chief priest in attendance. The ceremony took place in a small chamber deep within the palace, with only a few candles to light the room, and the chief priest joined them. And with that, the ceremony was over. Arinza and Neoma were married, and nothing would ever be the same again. After the marriage, Neoma was taken to the women's court, a separate wing of the palace where the king's wives and concubines resided. The king's wives, led by Edwoa, the first wife, took charge of Neoma's daily life, making sure she knew her place. They stopped Uju from visiting Neoma, citing palace rules and traditions. They also restricted the servants from attending to her, forcing Neoma to do everything herself. The king's wives made Neoma's life very difficult, assigning her hard tasks and criticizing her constantly. They resented her for marrying the king and becoming a queen, and they wanted to make her feel unwelcome. Neoma struggled to adapt to her new life, feeling isolated and alone. She missed Uju's visits and the servants' help, but most of all, she missed Arinza's love and support. Despite the challenges, Neoma refused to give up. She worked hard to prove herself, learning the palace customs and traditions, and trying to win over the king's wives. But no matter how hard she tried, they continued to make her life difficult, determined to break her spirit and make her leave the palace. Little did they know, Neoma was not one to give up easily. She was a survivor, and she would fight for her place in the palace and in Arinza's heart. Neoma's days became a never-ending cycle of bullying and harassment. Each of the king's wives took turns to mock her, belittle her, and make her feel worthless. They would criticize her cooking, her cleaning, and even her appearance. Neoma tried to complain to Arinza, but he just ignored her. He would tell her to be strong and handle it, without offering any support or protection. It was as if he had abandoned her to the mercy of his wives. With no one to turn to, Naomi's tears became her only solace. She would cry herself to sleep every night, feeling lonely, abandoned, and unloved. She began to doubt her decision to marry Arinza, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The chief priest, who had officiated their wedding, noticed Naomi's distress and tried to intervene. But even he was powerless against the king's wives, who had formed a united front against Naomi. As the days turned into weeks, Naomi's health began to suffer. She lost weight, her skin lost its glow, and her eyes became sunken. She was a shadow of her former self, and it seemed like no one cared. One day, while sweeping the courtyard, Naomi collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition. The servants rushed to her side, but the king's wives just stood by, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. It was clear that they wanted her gone, and they would stop at nothing to make it happen. Naomi woke up to an empty room, her body aching from the fall. She slowly got up, her eyes scanning the room for anyone, but she was alone. The servants had left her to fend for herself, following the orders of the king's wives. She realized that she had to do everything herself, from fetching water to cooking her own meals. If she didn't go to the farm, she wouldn't eat. If she didn't fetch water from the river, she would go thirsty. Her life was indeed worse than that of a palace servant. Naomi's tears flowed again as she thought about her situation. She had gone from being a beloved servant to a neglected wife. She felt like she was living in a nightmare, with no escape. As she worked, Naomi's mind wandered to Arinza, wondering why he had abandoned her like this. Had he ever loved her, or was it all just a ruse to get her into bed? She felt like she had been used and discarded, left to suffer at the hands of his cruel wives. The days turned into weeks, and Naomi's life became a never-ending cycle of drudgery and loneliness. She was a queen in name only, with no power, no love, and no happiness. Her only companions were her tears, and her only solace was her own resilience. The young ladies of the village would gather at the river, washing clothes and gossiping. Whenever Naomi came to fetch water, they would mock her, calling her names like a palace slave and a king's plaything. They would laugh and point at her, saying, "Look at the queen, reduced to fetching water like a common servant." They would ask her, "Where is your king now, and why doesn't he protect you?" Naomi would try to ignore them, but their words cut deep. She felt like she was losing her dignity, her self-worth. She would hurry to fetch the water and leave, trying to avoid their cruel taunts.